A good heist isn't always about the money. Sometimes it's about the precision, the kind of planning that takes months, maybe years, and depends on trust among people who live in a world where trust rarely lasts. Other times it's about nerve, walking into a vault or airport or warehouse, knowing one mistake means a lifetime behind bars, or worse. The best heists, the ones that echo through mob history, have all the elements of a great story: sharp minds, steady hands, and enough greed to make men gamble everything they have. They're not about small-time crooks with masks and guns. They're about professionals, people who understood that the right job could change everything. Organized crime was never built on stick-ups. The mob preferred steady income, gambling, loans, rackets that kept the money flowing. But when a big score came along, the right crew could make more in a single night than most men saw in a lifetime. Over the last century, a handful of those jobs stood out, audacious robberies pulled off with mafia backing or under its shadow. Some were near perfect. Others ended in betrayal, prison, or blood. All became legend. These are the top 5 heists in mob history, stories of money, power, and risk, chosen for their ties to organized crime, their daring execution, and the sheer scale of what was taken. It happened just after dark on Tuesday, August 14th, 1962. A U.S. mail truck rolled north toward Boston carrying $1.5 million in cash deposits from Cape Cod banks, payroll money, bank receipts, and other deposits bound for the Federal Reserve. The driver and guard didn't know it yet, but they were about to be part of what the press would call the Great Plymouth Mail Robbery, the largest cash heist in American history at the time. Somewhere near Plymouth, Massachusetts, a car appeared on the road flashing blue police lights. Men in full police uniforms stepped out, waving the truck to the side. Believing they were dealing with law enforcement, the mail crew stopped. Within seconds, shotguns came up, orders were barked, and the robbers took control of the truck. Traffic was detoured. The real police were nowhere nearby. The entire job was over in minutes. The men vanished into the night with $1.5 million, the equivalent of more than $15 million today. The plan had been simple, bold, and flawlessly timed. But it didn't take long for postal inspectors to start closing in. Investigators quickly focused on 2 names well known in Boston's criminal circles: John Red Kelly and George Billy Aggie Agisotilis. Both were career thieves connected to the city's network of mobsters, hitmen, and heistmen who sometimes worked for and sometimes against the New England Mafia. For 5 years, investigators chased leads across Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and beyond. The statute of limitations was running out when, in August 1967, prosecutors finally brought charges against Kelly, Aggie, Thomas Richards, and Patricia Diaferio. Before the case could be tried, Richards disappeared. Aggie agreed to cooperate, but before he could testify, he vanished too. Years later, mob hitman Morris Pro Lerner claimed he killed him. When the trial ended, Kelly and Diaferio were acquitted. No one was ever convicted. In the end, the cost of the investigation likely matched or exceeded the amount stolen. John Red Kelly wasn't a made man, but he was a trusted ally of those who were. He moved in circles that included Boston mobsters Phil Crester, Vincent Teresa, and Carmelo Merlino, men known for armed robberies, hijackings, and bank jobs. Later, as a federal witness, Kelly admitted he had been a contract killer for Raymond Patriarca, the powerful boss of the New England mob. According to mob associate Vincent Teresa, in his memoir, My Life in the Mafia, the Plymouth mail robbery had been Kelly and Aggie's idea from the start. They recruited a crew of experienced stick-up men and studied the mail route for weeks. Aggie followed the truck daily, learning every stoplight, side road, and timing pattern. They knew the exact moment it passed Plymouth, and that's where they struck. Former U.S. Marshal John Partington, who later became Kelly's handler in the Witness Protection Program, offered another glimpse behind the curtain in his book The Mob and Me. He wrote that Kelly told him Boston mob underboss Jerry Angulo had quietly financed part of the job. Angulo allegedly supplied $7,000 for fake police uniforms, masks, and shotguns, and later helped launder the stolen cash through mob-connected channels. That detail revealed the hidden truth about heists like this. The men who carried the guns didn't always belong to the mafia, but they operated in its world. No job of that size went unnoticed, and no money that big moved through New England without the mob taking its share. The Great Plymouth Mail robbery remains unsolved to this day. The cash was never recovered. The witnesses disappeared. The robbers either died, went to prison on other charges, or took their secrets to the grave. What's left is the legend, a perfectly executed stick-up that showed how, in mid-century Boston, every big score had the mob's fingerprints somewhere on it, whether in the shadows or at the counting table. It began in the quiet hours after New Year's Day, a cold, still Sunday morning in New York City. At 3 a.m. on January 2nd, 1972, 7 men walked into the marble lobby of the Pierre Hotel, one of Manhattan's most exclusive addresses. They were dressed in tuxedos and carried themselves like guests returning from a late party. Within minutes, the front desk staff, night security, and several guests were on the floor, staring down the barrels of guns. The robbers moved fast. They rounded up about 24 people, employees, guests, even a few unlucky bystanders, and herded them into the hotel's basement vault area. For the next 3 hours, the crew worked methodically, cracking open safe deposit boxes filled with jewelry, cash, and bearer bonds. When they were done, they walked out with an estimated $3 million in loot. In reality, it was likely much more. Many of the victims, wealthy patrons who valued their privacy, reported only a fraction of what they'd lost. It was the largest hotel robbery in history, and it happened under the noses of New York's finest. The men behind it weren't amateurs. Sammy Nallo and Bobby Comfort were career burglars with long records and even longer reputations. They'd once lifted $1 million in jewelry from actress Sophia Loren at the Sherry Netherland Hotel. They knew how to work a luxury target, quiet, clean, and profitable. Comfort and Nallo needed the right crew and the right backing. They found both. The Lucchese crime family controlled much of New York's high-end burglary scene, and nothing of this scale went forward without their blessing. Through Lucchese associate Christy "The Tick" Furnari, they got the green light, and more than that, the manpower. Furnari sent in 2 trusted specialists, safeman Bobby Germain and burglar Al Visconti. Nallo and Comfort added a few of their own, Turkish hitman Ali Ben, his brother-in-law Al Green, who would drive the getaway car, and Donald the Greek Frankos, a volatile gunman known for contract killings. They picked their moment carefully. The Pierre had only 2 guards working the night shift, and the morning after New Year's Day was always slow. Guests slept in late, staff levels were low, and the safe deposit boxes were full of diamonds and jewels worn to holiday galas just hours before. At around 3 a.m., the crew arrived in 3 cars. Green waited outside in a limousine. Inside, Nallo, Comfort, and the others approached the front desk, claiming to have a reservation under the name Dr. Forster, one of Comfort's aliases. The ruse got them close enough to the guards to make their move. Within seconds, the lobby was locked down. Downstairs, Nallo and Germain went to work on the safes. Comfort, ever the strategist, already knew which boxes were worth their time. During his scouting, he'd seduced the hotel's assistant bookkeeper, who revealed how the boxes were catalogued. She even gave him the logs, which he used to identify the most valuable targets. A mix of jewelry, cash, and untraceable bearer bonds. The crew had a window, 3 hours before the 7 a.m. shift change. They moved quickly, emptying boxes while keeping the hostages calm. But even the best plans stumble when people are involved. First came the newlyweds. A Brazilian guest named Mr. de Montejo called the front desk for an elevator. When it arrived, he, his bride, and his mother-in-law were met by armed robbers and taken hostage. Moments later, the lobby erupted in chaos because another hostage was Montejo's mistress, also staying at the hotel. The argument that followed nearly broke the tension of the entire operation. Then came another surprise. A resident named Jordan Graff arrived at the front entrance. Frankos intercepted him, gun drawn, and brought him inside. Moments later, Graff clutched his chest and collapsed, a heart attack. The robbers froze. None of them wanted a murder charge on top of armed robbery. They searched the guest registry and called the first doctor listed, but he was too drunk to answer coherently. So, Comfort made a decision that would become legend. He dialed 911. When paramedics and police arrived, the robbers hid the hostages in the vault and posed as hotel staff. The medics carried Graff out alive, completely unaware that they'd walked through the middle of an ongoing robbery. Once the ambulance left, the job resumed. By 6 a.m, the crew was wrapping up. They cleaned fingerprints, returned hostages to the safe room, and warned them to stay quiet. Before they left, they even handed out $20 tips to the hotel employees. "For your trouble," Comfort reportedly said, except to the security guards. "They've got cop mentalities," he told the others. By the time the sun came up, the men and the money were gone. Police faced a wall of silence. The victims, wealthy, discreet, and often carrying items of questionable provenance, underreported their losses. Descriptions of the robbers were vague at best. Over time, pieces of the loot surfaced in Detroit and Rochester, New York, but the bulk of it vanished into the underworld's black market. Authorities eventually arrested Nalo and Comfort, but only for possession of stolen goods tied to the case. No one was ever convicted of the Pierre Hotel heist itself. To this day, it stands as one of the most audacious jobs in New York history, a mix of elegance and chaos, professionalism, and sheer luck. The crew had planned it down to the second, but it was their cool under pressure that made it legendary. In less than 3 hours, they turned the Pierre, a symbol of Manhattan luxury, into the stage for a perfect crime, one the city still talks about half a century later. It was the kind of job no one in the underworld could have imagined. A robbery not of a rival gang or a bank, but of the mafia's own secret vault. The date was August 14th, 1975. The target sat behind an unassuming brick facade in Providence, Rhode Island, Hudson Fur Storage, home to the bonded vault company. On paper, it was a fur storage business. In reality, it was something else entirely. The unofficial bank of the Patriarca crime family. Inside the Hudson Fur building were 146 heavy safe deposit boxes. They held what the mob considered untouchable: cash, gold, silver, gems, even guns, stashed there by wise guys, bookmakers, and businessmen who couldn't use regular banks. Word on the street was simple: the bonded vault was off limits. Robbing it was like robbing the mafia itself. But on that summer morning, 8 men decided to do it anyway. At around 8 a.m., Robert the Deuce Dussault walked through the front door. He carried himself like a man who knew exactly what he was after. There were 5 employees on duty. Dussault pulled his weapon, herded them into an office, and covered their heads with pillowcases. Then he called in 6 more men waiting outside. Each wore gloves and carried tools. Inside the building, they addressed one another only by a single name: Harry. Their first plan was to drill through the steel doors. It didn't work. The boxes were too strong, the equipment too weak, so they switched to crowbars and brute force, prying open door after door, tearing the vault apart piece by piece. The work was noisy, slow, and dangerous, but no alarm sounded. No police came. For nearly 2 hours, they had the place to themselves. When the job was done, the men loaded their haul into bags and walked out the same way they came in. Estimates of the take ranged wildly, from $2 million to as much as $30 million, in cash, gold bullion, silver bars, jewels, guns, and rare coins. Whatever the real number, it was enough to make the bonded vault heist the biggest robbery in Rhode Island history. The crew regrouped at a hideout in East Providence, where they divided up an initial cut, $64,000 each in cash, and made plans to fence the rest. Dussault took his share and headed west to Las Vegas, where he gambled it away almost immediately. Broke and desperate, he started making mistakes. Back in Providence, police got their first break when one of the employees from Hudson Fur began cooperating, giving detectives physical descriptions of 2 of the men. Another lead came from inside the mob itself, a Patriarca family associate, furious that someone had dared hit their vault, quietly told investigators who was behind it. Before long, the FBI had names. Facing pressure and with nowhere to run, Dussault flipped. He began cooperating with federal agents, and another of the robbers, Joe Danese, followed suit. Together, they testified against their crew. 6 men went to trial, 3 were convicted, 3 walked free. But the biggest revelation came from Dussault's own confession. He told the FBI that the robbery hadn't been an act of rebellion at all. It had been an inside job ordered from the top. According to Dussault, Raymond Patriarca himself, the powerful boss of the New England crime family, had planned the heist. At the time, Patriarca was serving time for the murders of Rudolph Rudy Maffeo and Anthony Millay, and he was furious. From behind bars, he felt the family wasn't kicking enough money up to him, that he was being forgotten. So he decided to take what he thought he was owed. The bonded vault, he allegedly reasoned, was full of mob cash. By hitting it, he wasn't stealing from civilians or banks. He was collecting his own cut. Most of the stolen money, Dussault said, went straight back to Patriarca. Whether the boss truly ordered the job or Dussault was shifting blame to save himself has never been proven. What is certain is that the robbery humiliated the New England Mafia. Word of it spread fast that someone had looted the mob's private bank and lived to talk about it. The bonded vault heist remains the largest robbery in Rhode Island's history. A mix of greed, betrayal, and inside power plays that cut to the heart of what organized crime really is. Not loyalty, but business. Even in the mob, the biggest danger often comes from within. It started long before the gunman ever showed up at the airport. The Lufthansa heist wasn't dreamed up in a backroom by mobsters. It began with 2 desperate employees trying to pay off their debts. It was 1978. The setting, the Lufthansa cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport, one of the most secure facilities in the country. Inside was the high-value room, where millions in cash, jewelry, and negotiable securities passed through every week, flown in from German banks and waiting to be redistributed across the United States. 2 men on the inside, Peter Grunwald and Louis Werner, saw an opportunity. Both worked for Lufthansa, both knew the layout. Werner was in deep with gambling debts, owing over $6,000 to a bookmaker named Martin Krugman. He handed Krugman the idea: rob the vault. Krugman handed it to the wrong man, Lucchese associate Henry Hill. And Hill took it straight to Jimmy the Gent Burke, one of the most feared and efficient gangsters in New York. Burke had a reputation for precision and paranoia. He got permission from his boss, Lucchese capo Paul Vario, and built a crew around the inside information. He brought in his trusted men, Joe Buddha Manri, Tommy DeSimone, and a handful of others who'd worked airport jobs before. Werner showed them where to go, how the alarms worked, and when the guards changed shifts. The perfect inside job was taking shape. The night was chosen carefully. Monday, the December 11th, 1978, just after 3 a.m. The crew knew a fresh cash shipment, around $2 million, had arrived that weekend. What they didn't know was that another shipment had come in on top of it. At 3:12 a.m., the robbers cut through the padlock at the cargo gate. They wore ski masks and carried pistols. In less than a minute, they had the guards on the ground. The employees were rounded up in the break room, their hands tied with tape, their faces covered. One of the men forced the shift supervisor to shut off the alarm and open the vault. Inside, the robbers found not $2 million, but over $5 million in unmarked US currency, plus another $875,000 in jewelry and other valuables. It was more than anyone expected, $5.875 million total, the largest cash robbery in US history. At 4:21 a.m., less than 90 minutes after they'd entered, the van rolled out of JFK and disappeared into Queens. Not a single shot had been fired. Within hours, the FBI suspected Jimmy Burke. He was the common link between known hijackers, bookmakers, and truck thieves operating around the airport. But evidence was thin. Werner was the first domino to fall. He'd cut his partner Grunwald out of the final take, paying him only a token amount. Furious, Grunwald turned informant. Werner was arrested within days and sentenced to 15 years in prison. He was the only man who ever served time for the Lufthansa job. Everyone else, almost everyone, ended up dead. A week after the robbery, the cruise getaway driver Parnell Stacks Edwards failed to destroy the van used in the heist. Burke, furious, sent Tommy DeSimone to kill him. Edwards was found shot to death in his apartment. Over the next year, body after body turned up, men who had touched the job, heard about it, or asked questions. Martin Krugman, the bookmaker who brought Burke the idea, vanished in January 1979. Joe Buddha Manry and his partner were found murdered in May. By the end of that year, 11 people connected to the heist were dead. By 1987, the number had risen to 14. The lesson was clear. Jimmy Burke didn't share. In 2014, decades after the crime, the FBI arrested Bonanno family capo Vincent Asaro, accusing him of helping plan and fence the loot. He was acquitted. The evidence had long since vanished. The money, too, was never recovered. And Henry Hill, the man who'd passed the idea up the chain, never saw a dollar of it. He wasn't part of the actual robbery, but when he was arrested on drug charges in 1980, his testimony revealed what he knew. His story became the basis for Goodfellas, where the Lufthansa heist was immortalized as the ultimate mob score, the one that made everyone rich and got almost everyone killed. In reality, it was both. A near-perfect robbery executed with precision, undone by greed and paranoia. It made history not just for the money stolen, but for the body count that followed. In the underworld, that was the real price of success. It was just after 1 a.m. on March 18th, 1990. Quiet, still, the kind of hour when nothing moves in Boston except the wind off the harbor. Inside the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum, a security guard named Richard Abath sat behind the desk, half watching the monitors, half drifting through another long overnight shift. Then came the knock. 2 men in police uniform stood outside the side door, flashing lights from their cruiser cutting through the dark. They told Abath they were responding to a disturbance call. Against protocol, he buzzed them in. It was a decision that would go down in history. Within minutes, the officers had handcuffed Abath and another guard, duct taping their mouths and eyes. They weren't cops at all. They were thieves dressed for authority and prepared for precision. Over the next 81 minutes, they methodically stripped the museum of 13 masterpieces, cutting canvases from their frames, yanking gilded fixtures from walls and emptying an era of art into the back of a van. Among the losses were Vermeer's The Concert, Rembrandt's The Storm on the Sea of Galilee, Degas' sketches of Parisian dancers, and Manet's Chez Tortoni. The haul was valued at hundreds of millions, the single largest art theft in history. Before leaving, the men even took the videotapes from the security system, wiping away the only visual evidence of who they were. Abath was never charged, but his actions drew scrutiny. Investigators combed through his finances, his phone calls, his story. Nothing solid emerged. The only certainty was that whoever pulled off the Gardner job knew what they were doing and exactly how much time they had. In 1994, 4 years after the robbery, the museum received a letter. The anonymous writer offered to return the stolen paintings in exchange for $2.6 million and immunity from prosecution. The museum forwarded it to the FBI. The lead went nowhere. Years passed. Rumors multiplied. In 2010, the FBI sent the physical evidence, duct tape, handcuffs, and other items for DNA testing. Then in 2017, the Boston Globe reported a stunning revelation. Some of that evidence had gone missing more than a decade earlier. From the beginning, speculation turned to organized crime. The job was too professional, too deliberate to be random. One early theory pointed toward James Whitey Bulger, the feared boss of Boston's Winter Hill Gang. According to that theory, Bulger had orchestrated the heist to fund the Irish Republican Army, which had used stolen art in the past to buy weapons. But no evidence ever surfaced. When Bulger was finally captured in 2011 after 16 years on the run, he said nothing about the Gardner paintings. Back in 1991, Bulger's FBI handler John Connolly had asked him about the robbery. Bulger supposedly laughed it off. He said he didn't know who did it, but if anyone had pulled a job that big on his turf, they owed him tribute. Federal investigators later looked to another corner of Boston's underworld, the Mafia. In 2010, they searched a home in Maine belonging to Robert Guarente, a low-level mob associate who had died in 2004. They suspected he'd once held some of the stolen art. His widow told agents he'd passed 2 paintings to a Connecticut mobster named Robert Gentile. When agents raided Gentile's home in 2012, they didn't find the paintings. But they did find something telling: a handwritten list of the stolen Gardner works and their estimated values. Gentile denied any knowledge of the theft, claiming he'd been set up by other gangsters bragging about treasures they never had. Another theory pointed to a different kind of thief, one closer to the Mafia's inner circle. Bobby Donati, a Boston mobster and associate of Capo Vinny the Animal Ferrara, was rumored to be one of the men behind the masks. Shortly after the heist, Donati allegedly visited Ferrara in prison, claiming he'd stolen the paintings to use as leverage for Ferrara's release. According to a Boston jeweler named Paul Calantropo, Donati had come to see him in the spring of 1990, proudly showing off a golden eagle-shaped finial, identical to the one stolen from the Gardner Museum that night. A year later, in September 1991, Donati was found beaten, stabbed, and stuffed in the trunk of his Cadillac. If he knew where the art went, he took that secret to his grave. More than 3 decades later, the Gardner case remains unsolved. The stolen works, worth an estimated $500 million, are still missing. None have ever been recovered. The empty frames still hang on the museum's walls, silent reminders of what was taken and what has never been found. The FBI believes organized crime was involved. Maybe Boston's Mafia. Maybe small-time thieves who reached too high. Maybe men long dead, but no one knows for certain. What is certain is this. On that quiet March night, 2 men in fake uniforms walked into one of the most secure museums in the world and walked out with pieces of history. The Gardner Museum still offers a $10 million reward for their return, but the paintings, like the truth, remain in the wind.